Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to join the webinar Cross-Cultural Communication in the Context of the Belt and Road Initiative, one of our science diplomacy event series, which discusses the Belt and Road from a scientific point of view. My name is Li Binggu, and I'm the head of academic relations at SwissNext China, Science Consulate of Switzerland in China. Before we start, I'd like to say a few words about SwissNext. SwissNext is located in China, Boston, San Francisco, India, and Brazil. This year, we celebrate our 20-year anniversary. We connect the dots between Switzerland and China in higher education, research, and innovation. Just now, you have watched a short video of our highlight activities last year, and I hope that you have got a taste of what we do. Today, we are honored to have three distinguished experts in translation and interpretation with a co-chair of Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Translation and Interpretation, Graduate Institute of Interpretation and Translation from Shanghai International Studies University. Can you say hello to our audience? Professor Lianke.
Hi.
Professor Irene Zhang, Dean of Graduate
Hello.
Institute of Interpretation and Translation, Shanghai International Studies University. Professor Zhengren Li, Executive Dean of Graduate Institute of Interpretation and Translation, also from Shanghai International Studies University. Thank you, professors, for joining us at today's webinar. Now, I would like to explain one feature of this webinar. At the bottom, you will find the Q&A function. So please feel free to type in your questions during the webinar, and we will try to get through as many of them as possible in the Q&A session. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Hannelore Li Yanke. Professor Li Yanke is Professor Emeritus of Translation Studies of the University of Geneva, Honorary President of SUTI, member of Russian Academy of Sciences. She has published widely within the fields of translation didactics and interdisciplinary research. She has also served as co-editor of SUTI Forum for many years. She is now the co-chair of Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Translation and Interpreting, Shanghai International Studies University. Now welcome Professor Li Yanke to give her keynote presentation. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank SwissNext, most particularly you, Mrs. Gu Libing, for organizing this and for inviting me today. I would say good morning for the Europeans, good afternoon for China and Asia, and maybe good evening. I don't know whether we have guests from abroad. My purpose today is to give a brief historic introduction and outline the lessons which we can learn from history and mainly from the ancient Silk Road, and make a link to the new one. Now, since the markers of the Silk Road were not purely trade-oriented, but they were also related to issues with trade, for instance, linguistic issues, cultural issues, and I think to knowledge and skills on the whole. So I think the work of science diplomacy here is of major importance. Next, please. Thank you. So science diplomacy, what is it really? Science diplomacy is a key factor, as you can read here, in international and intercultural cooperation, which roots in ancient traditions, because, as mentioned just before, the knowledge exchange and cultural exchange were of major importance. In the more modern times, the activities, like the activities by SwissNext, for instance, started some 30 or even more years before in Boston, and they meant to enhance international relations, intercultural communication, and a major networking. Then we have also the science in the center of negotiation. What does it make different from diplomatic, purely diplomatic discourse? The difference is that the subject matter is of major importance and not only the national interest like in a diplomatic discourse. Therefore, I think the science diplomacy puts science in the center of negotiation, cooperation, and networking. In this context, obviously, conditio sine qua non is the linguistic and intercultural knowledge. And this, in turn, can be of mutual benefit for all the partners concerned. You can see I put in brackets here these research centers. We have research centers on national level, and then we have research centers on international level. They are mainly science oriented, and they are also interdisciplinary. Then I think, like SwissNext, to take cultural differences and needs into consideration. This is one of the tasks in science diplomacy as well. And I wanted to mention briefly the health diplomacy, which is being taught in Geneva by a high official, former high official from WHO since some 15 years. Now coming to the historic Silk Road. Next, please. Next, please. Thank you. Coming to the historic Silk Road, before I mention the features to retain, I think it's of interest to say that the name, or to recall that the name Silk Road was given by a German geographer, and he loved and admired China very much, and he coined the word Silk Road. We are not going to go into that, just for a small reminder. But the most important issue and feature, I think, is the so-called segmented transport routes of the ancient Silk Road. We have to imagine this like carrying nowadays the Olympic flame, which is handed over from one person to the other and one person to the next before it reaches its final destination. And each of these persons were given the so-called shopping lists, as you can read here, and I recommend highly the work and the research by Hartmann. Those lists were not only telling the person what to purchase and what to sell, but they were also giving instruction in different languages, very rare languages sometimes, very old languages, and telling them how to act in which way with which people. That means the cultural issue was fixed in those documents as well. The course went from east to west. If we think of silk, if we think of glassware, for instance, it went from west to east, and that's why some people talk in plural about the silk roads. There was a lot of exchange of know-how, mentioned silk already, paper making was very important, and exchange of knowledge. So knowledge at the times was in the center of the persons who had the chance to get into very big research projects at the time in Baghdad, financed by the Caliph, and they were really called great research projects. One was mainly in astronomy, the other one was drawing up a new world map, and the third one was finding out methods to measure the circumference of the Earth. All this new knowledge was anchored in a large library, as we have to imagine it, the House of Wisdom. There are many more things which have been going from east to west, mainly from east to west and a bit from west to east, and I can't get into all of it. Of course, the last point you have here, philosophies and religions, and they were handed over, if I may say so, through translation and interpretation. Next, please. Now, the Belt and Road today aims at inclusion of more remote communities thanks to better infrastructure. I mean, we have followed all this recently, the high-speed trains, the road, and so forth. It wants to facilitate the knowledge also, because if schools and training institutions can get reached easier, obviously it will be a benefit for them to improve language knowledge as well. I skip a couple of things. I think what is interesting here is that the target is really a win-win situation between the concerned partners through better mutual cultural understanding. We witness, alas, today how important these things are, and connect with local people and show the importance of Tianxia. Sorry for my pronunciation. It is this ancient Chinese notion which means everything under heaven, and has been very well explained by the Chinese contemporary philosopher Zhao. Next, please. In a nutshell, Belt and Road today, I think, if I would have to say it in one short sentence, it's cooperation instead of isolation. And I would like to pinpoint here also a few things. Despite the interconnection, geographical interconnection, I think using trade and research to foster increased peaceful coexistence is very important. Fostering the awareness and appreciation of diverse cultures, not only because we are imposed to do so, but we should show the interest and learn from it, to share and exchange knowledge and skills, to maximize mutual benefit. And I think the word respect is very important. If I read this to you here, you read it again and again, and one has the impression of a kind of déjà vu phenomenon. But unfortunately, we have to say it and act in a certain way again and again in a repeated way, I wanted to say. Now, the last point here, I think is very important. Again, I quote Professor Zhao, that systemic changes are needed which help to make inclusion come true. This is one of the key words, key issues in his book, which I quoted. Well, the English translation is everything under heaven, past and future of the world order. Next, please. So I think as language mediators, what we need is knowledge of history to understand the present and shape the future. And I would like to just very briefly, because I have 1 minute or less than a minute now. Next, please, if you look through those references. So the first one stresses that there are several Silk Roads, as I just mentioned. The second one, this group, the research team around Hartmann, Manning, and Wang, they talk about China's new Silk Road, and they analyze those shopping lists from a linguistic and cultural perspective. And I think it is really, I found it very interesting. Then you have the others. And the last one, Professor Zhao, I recommend it highly. The origin, of course, is Chinese. Unfortunately, my Chinese is non-existent, so I can just recommend you to find the original book, and the translation anyway is very good. I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to listen to my two colleagues and warm friends. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Li Yanke, for the interesting talk. Now I'm delighted to introduce Professor Irene Zhang, Dean of Graduate Institute of Interpretation and Translation from Shanghai International Studies University. She is Secretary General of Shanghai Committee for Translation and Interpreting Education. Professor Zhang has worked for a portfolio of high-profile interpreting events in both public and private sector. She has received prestigious awards in recognition of her achievements in teaching and research. Professor Zhang, the floor is yours.
Sorry, my bad. Thank you, Libby. Thank you. So let me begin by echoing Professor Lianke in thanking SwissNext and thanking Li Binggu for inviting us. I've been listening very attentively to Professor Lianke just now, and I think a couple of places I will echo her views too. I forgot to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our audience in different parts of the world. I think intercultural communication has become particularly important and pertinent to our time. Next, please. My next slide, please. Thank you, thank you. So that is more or less what I'm going to focus today. We are going to talk a little bit about the Belt and Road Initiative and the sort of professional service that will be required. And I am quoting a theme line from the Federation of International Translators in 2012, which basically says translation as intercultural communication. And then we will discuss a little bit the pivot language, or probably languages along the Belt and the Road. Next, please. Professor Li just now has actually given us a historical kind of look back at the Silk Road. The Silk Road, the ancient Silk Road, started long before 164 BC, and the name Silk Road was given by the name that Professor Li just referred to, the German geographer Ferdinand Freiherr von Richthofen. Sorry, forgive my German pronunciation. The Belt and Road Initiative was proposed by China's President Xi in 2013 to chart out new territories for international cooperation. From his talks, from the discussion seminars, workshops that have been held with the theme Belt and Road Initiative, it actually embodies the spirit of peace and cooperation. You hear the words like an openness, inclusiveness, mutual learning, mutual benefit. So those are the recurring words. I mean, recurring themes in the endeavor to develop this Belt and Road. I mean, economically, culturally. I have a PPT, I think, later for this. It's open to all countries and organizations. 135 countries and regions already joined, covering the Middle East, covering Eastern Africa mainly, Eastern Europe, and I mean, even part of the Western Europe as well. Next slide, please. Continue a bit more on the Belt and Road Initiative. It's actually two initiatives. One is the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road, and also the Silk Road Economic Belt. Both of them were announced, as I said, by President Xi Jinping in 2013. So there is this maritime road it's of course, it's maritime, covering 63% of the global population. This is just roughly in terms of the GDP, not including China. And also there is this Asian Silk Road, or the landlocked economic belt that connects two of the world's largest economies, that is Asia and Europe. So this is a major logistics corridor. And of course, there are significant energy and mining opportunities. Next one, please. This is more or less a kind of a picture to show the Silk Road, where you can see the camel part, and the maritime Silk Road in blue. So it starts from China, but it extends all the way to Africa, to Europe. Next one, please. This is again a bit of a further breakdown about the Belt and Road Initiative. What is included? So it covers cultural exchange, policy coordination, facilities, connectivity, trade and investment, and also financial integration. So basically, it covers all areas of economic and cultural activities. And I think we are here talking about intercultural communication, the people-to-people bonds. So that is our focus, I think, for the discussion here. Next page, please. More about the initiative, the 5 major goals, as you've seen in the previous slide. So there's coordination, the connectivity, the integration, and the friendly bonds between peoples. Next page, please. I included this PPT here, a bit of a detail. This is the first forum, the first Belt and Road Forum. Of course, large number of people turned up in Beijing. And then there was the follow-up one in 2019. In 2018, China announced that it's going to hold a China International Import Expo starting from 2018. And this year, the year 2020, will see the 3rd of the Import Expo, which attracts large number of overseas businesses to come to Shanghai, where, I mean, that's the venue of the international, the International Import Expo, because it has its venue in Shanghai, a beautiful, beautiful place in the southwest part of Shanghai. I do hope that everybody would have an opportunity to visit there. Next page, please. Interestingly, Switzerland and China have signed a memorandum of understanding for cooperation on trade, investment, and finance. Of course, there are 3rd countries along the road, along the Belt and Road. The memorandum was signed in April 2019, not terribly long ago. Yes, next page, please. We're going to talk about the cultural side, the language side. So as our viewers, our audience must have been very familiar with this. China has this vision for the whole world, that is a community for shared future, community of shared future. So one belt, one road, one community. We are living in one global village. But of course, along the Belt and Road, there are major languages, including Chinese, Russian, and Arabic. And the university that I work for, Shanghai International Studies University, has actually opened or initiated or launched a School of Russian and Eurasian Studies. They've written more than 70 reports this year after the COVID-19. So indeed, they've been doing a lot in terms of cultural communication and the communication of latest information. Next page, please. this is also one of the latest projects that my colleagues and students at the Graduate Institute of Interpretation and Translation, they've done together this project, Life Tree Books. It's actually a website for kids, for children, how to protect themselves against the coronavirus, for example. You will have to wash your hands, wear your masks, and that sort of thing. So it's translated into almost 20 different languages, and it has been published. The project is still going on, but basically, I think the children get the idea that the whole world is a community. We are a family. But I mean, because of the COVID-19, we may have to be confined at home, but together at home, so to speak. So this is also the sort of efforts that we have been making to enhance the communication, cultural communication between us, between different countries and different peoples. Next page, please. I talk a little bit about the pivot language thing. The Belt and Road Initiative was initiated by China, and heavy investments have been made by China in terms of, I mean, by the businesses, companies, and in education. So Mandarin has indeed become one of the major languages, I think, one of the most important languages of communication between China, the Chinese construction workers, for example, business people, professionals. So, I mean, in terms of the teaching of the language, I think it's almost 150 now. The number is a bit needs updating. Confucius Institutes, for example, Confucius classrooms. So quite a big number of students and people are studying, learning the Chinese language along the way. Li Bing is reminding me of 1 minute that I have left. Next page, please. I'm wrapping up. Of course, China has been providing government scholarships to tens of thousands of students from the Belt and Road countries. And also Chinese students are encouraged to study in BNR countries. There are still numbers here which need updating, but there is a big number of the sort of cultural exchanges between China and the countries along the Belt and Road. Next page, please. I think I'm more or less, yeah. So the intercultural communication can be empowered further by latest technology, for example, artificial intelligence. I mean, later we can come to talk about more. So it's a technology empowered, technology enabled, and technology-backed kind of exchanges. And we have a sort of we have joint efforts in, for example, having this laboratory for the technology applications in T&I. Last page, please. One last page, please. Yeah, so I would like to end my presentation with this quote from the former French Prime Minister. China's plan to build this Silk Road is actually a story that we are writing together to benefit from the new economic development. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Zhang, for the informative presentation. Now I would like to introduce Professor Zhenren Li. Professor Li is the former Chief of Interpretation Service, United Nations Office at Geneva. He joined the United Nations translation work in 1984 and went on to accumulate a wealth of practical experience in conference interpreting and management. He had sat on the jury of interpreting recruitment exams of the United Nations of the European Union for many successive years. He is currently the Executive Dean of Graduate Institute of Interpretation and Translation, Shanghai International Studies University. Professor Li, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your very kind introduction. Now, today I'd like to start to say greetings from Geneva, where I'm in house confinement thanks to the COVID-19. I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes or so to talk about the language services for Belt and Road Initiative. Next one, please. Next, please. Now, this graph actually shows the area covered by an BNI initiative. How do we turn it into reality? How do we get it going? And in what language would the Chinese people be speaking to those areas, the people who live in all those areas? Is it going to be English as lingua franca? Or is it going to be local languages? How comfortable would you be speaking English to people in Turkey, for example, in Italy, in Kazakhstan? Probably lingua franca, English as is known to be, gets you started. But when it comes to nitty-gritties, I would bet it has to be the local language. And the saying goes, the devil is in the details. For example, the fastener as an English word is a small tool that joins two or even multiple units. But how many shapes and colors and styles are there? When we talk about fastener, it may not be a big issue, but elsewhere, but in Europe it is. Because any project would need tons of fasteners to get started. Even if we know how to say it in English, do people on the other side understand us? You have to be the local language. For us as language professionals, we need to get our English to a much higher level. But then the ultimate test of our ability to communicate will be the local language command. This is the only way to communicate without misunderstanding. Unless, of course, given all the efforts that have been going on, and people will be able to converse in Mandarin, but that's not going to happen tomorrow. Next, please. Next. Now, here I have a slide that shows two shops. Manor is a famous department store in Geneva. Patek Philippe is a specialized shop for top watch. I showed the two pictures to tell the story as follows. Say we need a pair of shoes. Where do we go to buy them? Online, department store, or boutique shop? That's a huge difference in price. Anything between 100 and 1,000. But these shops and online possibilities coexist. The fact that the department store can sell you a pair of shoes for 200 doesn't eliminate the business of a boutique shop, where probably you need to pay up to 1,000, even more for a pair of shoes. The premium is explained by the difference in design, in color, and style, and quality. What does that tell us in terms of language? We're language professionals. We have to be better. Our English has to be good enough. And we're not talking about assembly line products. We're talking about something that's better than the machine that can produce. Another example, as I said, talking about a watch. You can get a watch in Manor for 50 Swiss francs, 100 Swiss francs. But you need a Patek Philippe, you have to go to a different shop. You don't get it in Manor. When I talk about doctors versus specialists, what I mean is when somebody is feeling unwell, will go to a hospital, you're not going to see a heart surgeon right away. You're probably going to see a general practitioner. As a matter of fact, you're going to see a nurse first. For a nurse, for a general practitioner, you probably pay, say, 200 francs an hour. When you see a specialist, it's going to be a different story. It's going to be multiple times of that. And if by any chance you are required to go through a CT scan, you're probably going to cost you 1,000 Swiss francs. All the differences justify the existence of different levels of language command. That's the bottom line. I will talk about lingua franca, a language that enables you to get around, or are you talking about languages that get the nitty-gritties out? You don't actually talk about, coming back to my story, you don't need a heart surgeon to take care of the common flu. On the other hand, you don't want the general practitioner to do your open heart surgery. Next one, please. Next one, please. Now, we talked about artificial intelligence and AI-enabled machines, which is pretty popular in China and elsewhere. And I briefly mentioned or hinted that AI, I don't think is going to replace human translators. It is getting very close, closer, but not close enough to the level of our language command yet. It may be good enough as a lingua franca, but look at the few examples I'm showing you right here. These are the real examples. The highlight is one in the middle, without the knowledge of Chinese. How would you understand the English warm prompt? You wouldn't understand much, right? But this is what machine can produce, and it has been able to produce. And if our level of English is somewhere similar to what can be produced by machine, and you're actually losing job to the machine, you need to actually think. I, for one, would ask myself whether my salary as a translator is justified, knowing the machine can do faster. But we're not there yet. I don't think machine is close to replacing human translators if we're really good. We're talking about good translators. Now, the next slide, I'm going to show you the translation the other way around. Now, this one is about Chinese into English. Next one, please. Yes. I'm not actually bashing the machine. I'm trying to tell as is, calling a spade a spade. I'm not singling out Google. As a matter of fact, they have been providing huge service to us because the volume machine has been able to handle is something unimaginable if it's purely to be handled by human translators. But just some simple examples right here to tell you that they are still far away from replacing us. They're not there yet. So the machine has its functions. If you think about machine translation as something similar to a department store where you probably get everything under the sun, when you talk about human interpreters as something similar to a specialized boutique shop, they coexist. They're not going to replace each other. And they coexist for a reason, depending on the clientele. Next one, please. Next one. Now, here comes to my last slide. So lingua franca is something that get you around, but lingua franca or specialized languages, so local languages, these are the tools that will ensure success of BNR. Without languages, I don't think we can talk about the BNR success. BNR and success depends on language. And language is science diplomacy, and language is soft power. Like these two bridges. On the left is a famous bridge in Lausanne, Switzerland. On the right is an ultra-modern bridge in Shanghai. They serve one function, they connect 2 points. Language is actually the tool with which the BNR can be carried out. People can think of crossing a river without a boat, without a bridge. A good swimmer probably can cross a stream, but we're talking about Yangtze River here. So we need good tools We need a good bridge. We need a good ship just to get the message across and get the BNR to its successful objectives. And that's why languages are important. Without language, I use a word sine qua non. Without language, there will be no success. Thank you. Next one. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. Now we come to the Q&A session. Since we have a lot of questions, so we will try to answer as many as possible. Then I think the first one is addressed to Irene regarding the Chinese as pivot language and also the AI-backed machine translation. Actually, there are two questions. What is your precise definition of pivot language? And could you explain a bit more how the AI-backed machine translation with Chinese as a pivot language will be used? What languages are currently being developed? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Li Bing. Well, the word pivot language in our field for professional interpreters, simultaneous interpreters, we would use the word relay. It's basically a language that would connect different other languages. For example, if you have one language from, let's say, somebody from Myanmar, and then somebody from Vietnam, and then we have Chinese. So the different languages, well, English is the international lingua franca, of course, because of for obvious reasons. But when we need a language that could connect all the other languages, for example, from English to Chinese, as in the UN, I mean, Professor Lee would be in a better position to answer that. We use the UN example, let's say, to avoid two local languages. The English would be the pivot language or the relay language. So if a Chinese delegate takes the floor, then the Chinese booth colleagues will do it from Chinese into English, and then the English booth, non-English booths, French, Arabic, Spanish, Russian booths will pick up the English and then go into their languages. So that is, the pivot means the center language or the relay language. For the AI-backed kind of development in terms of languages along the Belt and Road, the idea actually is based on facts, because as I said in my one of my PPTs, the number of people learning Chinese along the Belt and Road have been growing. And after all, it's a project, it's an initiative that was launched in China, and China has devoted man and power, a lot of energy in, for example, investing and helping countries along the way. Construction workers, for example, business people, professionals have been sent to help or to work along the in the countries along the Belt and Road Initiative. So, there is this need for a language that would be best or most efficiently communicated to the target countries. In this case, since we have such a big number of Chinese being sent to these countries, for the sake of efficiency, for example, Chinese would be the best one for these Chinese-speaking people to express their views. And then, I perfectly agree with Zheng that in the sense that AI or technology cannot replace people, no. But for example, some things that machines can do, or the technologies can enable it to happen. For the moment, the AI sort of enabled language communication, they've been doing languages, I think almost 50 or something, that can be done through machine translation, and we're collaborating with our technology side, technology colleagues, for better collaboration, put it this way, between technologies and human beings. So it's a kind of a human-machine collaboration work. It's not to replace human translators or interpreters. It's to collaborate and to assist, to make things happen. I wonder if I answered your question, Li Bing, but thank you for, I think those are excellent questions.
Yeah, actually, they are from our audience. Then following these two questions, then I think we have another one very interesting, maybe for all our speakers. What other capacities should we as language learners be equipped with concerning the context of an increasingly active interactions between One Belt and One Road countries and regions? So this is for all the professors, like with a focus on the human translation, and as the cultural mediator, what kind of capacities, what kind of qualities they should be equipped with. Professor Li Yanke, what do you think?
Well, personally, I think next to the language quality and the cultural quality, I think a subject matter would be which is related, any kind of science or technical issues which is related to the task would be definitely of importance. For instance, within the framework of legal translation or public service interpreting, you would have to have the knowledge of the given field, and I think this is something what is being done in the framework of the training at SISU, at GIT, for instance, where students get a very solid knowledge also of subject matter, not only of the language and of the language transfer from one to another. Yeah, I think this is probably an important thing next to cultural issues and linguistic issues.
Thank you very much.
Don't know if my two colleagues agree, but that's what I would suggest nowadays. Yes.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, Zhengren, you are the biggest employer of interpreters and translators. Maybe you have, yeah.
Let me jump in here. In the framework of Belt and Road, and if the question comes from language professional, my idea is first to get language solid. Quite often, that's not exactly solid enough. It's quite wobbling. That's number one. Number two, I'm talking about Belt and Road covering such a vast area. Any area of speciality will do. Try not to be the jack of all trade. Try to be that's my advice. Try to zoom in on one particular field. Say, talk about bridge building, talk about a factory running, talk about finance, talk about anything. Try to be an expert in one particular field, plus with your language. And that will actually be at a huge value to Belt and Road. That's my 2 pence advice.
Interesting.
Then Irene, do you have something to add?
I agree with two Professor Lee's, with Handel and Zhengren. I think it's critically important that one has to get their working languages there. They have to be ready language-wise, and at the same time, of course, you need to have to do your job well. You would need to have workable knowledge, in the field that you are focusing, and also the sort of encyclopedic knowledge that might be required, because everything is going more and more interdisciplinary, Handel, right? So it's not just confined to one discipline only. So anything will help. But the basic language competence, the sort of core values, that sort of thing have to be there in order for a person to be able to, to survive and then thrive in this world. Thank you, Li Bing. That's it from me for the moment.
Thank you. Then I have another question regarding the Sino-Swiss cooperation under the framework of Belt and Road. Where do you see the main possibilities for collaboration between Chinese and Swiss universities in the context of Belt and Road Initiative? Professor Lianke?
Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking, I know, you know, the strengths of Switzerland, Switzerland being a small country, but the strength of Switzerland is definitely also within technical matters and within research. So I would find again these two, maybe those two sectors of major importance if somebody is interested to participate and to contribute with his or her knowledge and skills in the Belt and Road Initiative. And I could imagine that on this platform, you would find many possibilities of a collaboration. It depends really again on the knowledge and the interest of the person concerned. If you are still in a training institution, in a university, I think it is of interest to look at the exchange, the trade between the two countries, the science diplomacy you are doing. I think these two platforms would help you to understand exactly where need is and where you can come in, but you have to have the qualifications. It has been just said by Professor Zhang and Professor Li. It is very important, of course, the language, but then also the interest to the subject matter, because if you are a person who is not technically equipped like me, then you better do something else. So that's what I want to say. One has to know oneself, and your interest is very important. But I think know the exchange and know what is needed in terms of science, for instance, also science diplomacy.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Li and Professor Zhang.
You can jump in with a gentle reminder here when we talk about cooperation between Chinese and Swiss universities. Please kindly bear in mind one thing. In Switzerland, we have 4 national languages. If you're talking about working with the Geneva-based university, we probably talk about the Francophone. And unlike some of the people who send the people to Zurich to learn French, Zurich being a Germanic region. So that's something to be careful about. When we talk about cooperation, we're talking about different languages already to start with. And then we take it from there. And universities in Switzerland, they have national, what they call federal universities, that's the Lausanne and Zurich. Then we have universities managed at the canton level. So we need to know exactly what we're talking about, language and the level of universities. Then we take it from there. Thank you.
Thanks. Professor Zhang?
I mean, I've had 2 excellent, outstanding Swiss colleagues here. I mean, based on the communication or collaboration between Shanghai, between SISU and the Swiss universities, we had several workshops or conferences together with our Swiss colleagues. I think there is a lot of potential to collaborate between Swiss universities and Chinese universities, as long as we find, you know, areas of common interest and areas that we can work together. So I'm very bullish about cooperation between the universities in the 2 countries.
Okay, thank you very much. So due to the time constraint, I will ask one last question to maybe more to Professor Li and Professor Zhang, since it's quite technical. So how to avoid information gaps when translating from a high context language, Chinese, for example, into low context language, German, for example, and especially for AI assisted translation. Thank you.
Well, yeah, it is technical. A high context language like Chinese, yeah, could be a bit nerve-wracking for our non-Chinese speaking colleagues, because oftentimes I mean, it's not everything. Not everything is said in words. You will have to read between the lines. You will have to be able to decipher a little bit the packaged sort of information, because we don't use the sort of logical links that much. I mean, we are a high context language. A lot of the logic is implied or intrinsic. But still, I mean, there is the context that we can fall back on. So if you want to understand the sort of hidden message behind what we say, then the more you know, the better. I mean, the language that, I mean, the culture that supports the language or goes behind the language, that is probably a very important thing. I mean, context per se could be a subject that we can discuss a whole day. So yeah, get to know the context, get to know the culture, and get to know the people. I think Professor Li there, Zhengren, you have something to add, right, about the Chinese language being a high context language.
If I may add, I'll just say in translating either direction, the key is to get the gist out, get the spirit out instead of word for word. Something that machine can easily handle. And whether it's a high context or low context, the important thing, the cardinal criteria, as far as I'm concerned, is so what is not said and what is really meaning. When we talk about language, we're not talking about word for word. The reason that I don't feel being replaced by machine anytime soon, because I can do something the machine cannot do. There's a facial expression, there's body language, and there's something that not really verbally communicated, but it is conveyed nevertheless through other means. So that's why in translation, we need to know what we're talking about. Lots of things, not only in Chinese, as a matter of fact, and the little English I know has quite often some of the context that we from the face value will not be able to decipher. So that's why try to get the language to a level where you can feel comfortable and you actually know what the real intention of the speaker is. And that's the key, that's the way to go.
Okay, thank you very much. So since it's already 5 o'clock, so I'm gonna do a very quick recap of today's webinar, if I may. So first, Professor Li Yanke, during her presentation, she explained the key features of the historic Belt and Road and the aims of today's Belt and Road, and underlined that as language mediators, translators and interpreters need to know about the past to understand the present and to shape the future. Then Professor Irene Zhang pointed out that the building of the people-to-people bond is a crucial part for the Belt and Road Initiative and calls for effective communication among the Belt and Road countries. Then she also presented a professional perspective on how to use Chinese language as a pivot language. In the end, Professor Zhengren Li put the emphasis on the importance of quality language service as a contributor to the success of Belt and Road, and that AI will definitely not replace human translators. So that's all from my side, and I would like to express our sincere gratitude for the professors here today. A great appreciation to Professor Li Yanke, to Professor Zhang, and Professor Li for your available time and your deep insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So in the end, I will show the last slide for our audience. If you have more questions or if you have questions that we haven't covered during the webinar, please send them to the email address on this slide. We will transmit the questions to the professors and give their feedback to you. You are also more than welcome to scan the QR code to follow us on LinkedIn, WeChat, and subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you very much for your active participation. Wish you have a good day. Thank you.
You too,
Thank you
Libby.
very
Bye.
much. You
Thank
too.
you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.